Restoration Act. I'm Wyatt.
I'm Jenna.
And we're going to bring you second day coverage of this act. For those of you who don't remember, this act is, the bill is trying to eliminate commercial logging on federal public lands. We heard a lot of great arguments on Monday, and for a recap, let's go to Jenna.
Well, on Monday in Capitol Hill, the bill was killed in the House with a 4-2 vote, but will still be passed along to the Senate. We had supporting states of Arizona and California, and opposing states of Maine, West Virginia, Virginia, and Oregon. We're very curious to see where this will end up in the Senate today. We're going to be hearing from the same states as Virginia, Florida, Oregon, Arizona, California, Maine, and West Virginia. We will also be hearing support groups and opposing groups, an economist, an ecologist, and representatives from the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Forest Service. We have heard from the Senate leader that the President will be speaking at the end today, so stay tuned for that. We'll also be doing some interviewing at the end, just like last week, to be able to hear different views and feelings after we get the final vote. And here is Ms. Anderson to lead the Senate.
I will now call all the Senate members up to the front. Mr. Morgan Bissell, representing Virginia. Mr. Tyler McKee, representing California. Ms. James. We will start today with our supporting group, so I will first call up Mr. Caleb Goldsmith.
I'm a representative of Trout Unlimited. I'm here today to discuss my support of S34, National Forest Protection and Restoration Act. This bill is critical in keeping natural and healthy trout and salmon streams throughout the United States. The passing of this bill will allow trees on the national forest lands to become mature near streams and eliminate logging roads. Eliminating stream crossings will reduce stream and soil erosion, along with get rid of culverts that are built in order to cross streams. These culverts hinder fish movement upstream, and because they can become clogged with debris. Since I have a limited time, I will only speak on the effects of sedimentation from logging, since it is a primary factor in effects of fisheries. Sedimentation from these crossings and roads can be detrimental to trout populations. Logging sites can cause large sediment loads into the stream with the removal of trees, and these large sediment loads will fill in small spaces between gravel and small rocks in the stream that young salmonoids depend on in order to have cover from predators. This cause gives young trout a less likely chance to survive to become reproducing adults. A study done by G. Condiff in 2000 showed that an increase in sediment by only 30% can reduce survival of salmonid eggs by half. With this restored habitat in the streams on national public lands, it will attract recreation for trout and salmon fishing. A study done in 2008 by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service showed that $1.1 billion was made in local economies in southeast Minnesota, southwest Wisconsin, and northern areas of Iowa and Illinois. To put that in perspective, that's 1/3 of Wisconsin's dairy industry, which brought in $3.1 billion. Fishing is just a small piece of recreation, and with the passing of this bill, recreation income will only increase. Since its inception in 1975, local Trout Unlimited chapters and councils contributed $17 million in cash and in-kind services in helping to restore stream habitat, improving fish passage, and protecting water quality in 16 different states from coast to coast. So on behalf of Trout Unlimited, we'll support this bill in order to create more healthy streams on national land for the public to embrace and enjoy the fisheries.
I'm speaking in favor of HR 3420, National Forest Protection and Restoration Act, of the support group. This act is on behalf of large number of Americans, as this act is really equitable, appreciable, essential, and commercial. In the present context of all, people are battling against the climate change and pollution and other more harmful effects because of forest destruction and industrialization. These days, people are alert about the consequences in environment and are now taking interest in protecting and restoring native biodiversity in our federal and land for economic, biophysical, and environmental benefit for the current and future generation. Furthermore, this act will provide support for people looking forward to protecting pristine forest, which is in the interest of large number of Americans. large number of Americans include other endangered and significant species. Besides this, forests absorb rainfall, retired storm runoff, reduce floods, increase stability, and retain topsoil. Moreover, commercial logging has many indirect costs which are significant but not measured. Thus, all are harmful to recreation and tourism. Humans want to protect their environment, watersheds, develop study area, and want to contribute to the nature and future generations. By handing over neat and clean environment, a long-term strategic plan has showed that recreation and tourism of National Forest System recreates over 30 times more jobs and generates 30 times more income. I would like to conclude by saying that forest protection, National Forest Protection and Restoration Act is very beneficial to us, all the interested groups and the UVS, the general people and other and our environment.
I'm here on behalf of the Earth Policy Institute. Today I want to talk a little about HR 3420 and why its legislation would be beneficial to our country. The National Forest Restoration and Protection Act, introduced by Representatives James Leach and Louise Slaughter and, on July 26, 2005. This comprehensive bill would end the federal timber sale program, which costs American taxpayers more than $1 billion annually, but provides for less than only 2% of our annual consumption of wood products. This bill puts America's national forests off limits to commercial logging, which would save taxpayers billions of dollars by redirecting funds to restore forests and help diversify the economies of communities that receive revenues from federal logging activities. In 1897, Congress actually made the decision to allow for the national forests to be open to timber sales. Before that, it was completely off limits. This was due to a rider attached to the Interior Appropriations Bill, which allowed for the harvest to occur. And since then, the results have been habitat destruction, ecosystem degradation, floods, mudslides, and enormous loss to taxpayers. This bill is particularly important to the future of our old-growth forests. In 1990, National Geographic estimated that 95% of America's old-growth forests have been harvested. More recent polls estimate the number is now closer to 97%. Unless precautionary action is taken now, future generations of Americans may not be able to visit these pristine areas. Furthermore, according to an independent study, later deemed accurate by the Congressional Research Service, the U.S. Forest Service spent $791 million in taxpayer money per year to subsidize timber companies in efforts to harvest lumber, and not what $1 is returned to the Treasury. This bill plans to reinvest some tax dollars that would otherwise be spent subsidizing logging on restoring native biodiversity and natural ecological processes. In most circumstances, natural processes will heal damaged areas without assistance, but in many circumstances where extensive damage from logging and road building is evident, it's necessary to take immediate action to stop soil erosion and pervasive resource damage. Therefore, ecological restoration projects shall emphasize the removal of barriers that prevent ecosystems from restoring themselves. Some examples of such barriers are roads, erosions, landslides, non-native invasive species, fire suppression, certain types of hazardous fuels, dams, or man-made barriers in streams, and other significant man-made damage and developments that interfere with natural ecological processes. Thank you.
I'm here to oppose S3420, the Natural Forest Protection and Restoration Act. And the first question brought to it would be the ecology of it. All the ecologists stress for the native biodiversity, but like you said, 96% of the pristine forests have already been harvested, so they're already not at their natural stage. So once these areas are logged by the commercial logging on the federal lands, the companies rely on natural regeneration to grow back, which means whatever there is going to come back, which was what before, to the pristine forest, which is exactly what the Natural Heritage Restoration Group is ideal at fixing the problem right now. The next problem right now is the fire hazard. they're saying the money that is used to subsidize all this logging could be for fire protection and all that. But back in the 1990s, there's a lot of slash and debris left, which was a lot of the problem for the fire, which now there's a market for biomass. And the market for biomass is steadily rising, so the debris, the hazardous fuel for fire would not be there around the sites that's present on these federal lands. And this can be, the new market for biomass can be factored in for the revenue for which the numbers have previously been stated that would be upcoming as the market continues to rise in biomass. And also the commercial logging, it helps to assess and eliminate hazardous areas where fire is imminent. So now a big problem is all these areas where fire is a problem, people are saying don't cut, don't cut, don't cut. But in all reality, the fuel is being burned up or built up, and these areas need to be logged to reduce that fuel. Also, if you eliminate the commercial logging, you'd eliminate ways to get rid of invasive pests, which is becoming a very big problem, not only on the East Coast, but the West Coast as well. And types of those problems that the commercial logging get rid of is gypsy moth, Asian longhorn beetle, and pine short beetle, which can destroy many amounts of these pristine forests. And another issue is they're saying it will have no effect on the local economies, that it's only 5% that makes up the production and that it wouldn't affect any loggers. But in reality, 30,000 jobs is a lot of jobs, but not only on the East Coast, on the West Coast, as was mentioned in Oregon, the logging on federal land makes up a lot of their market. So if you took that away, it would backlash in their market and push all the market into the private sector, and it would change things majorly out there.
Thank you to the Senate for allowing me to speak today. My name is Stephen Bennett, and I'm a representative from the Virginia Forest Products Association. So I'd like to start off today by describing sort of what we do and what we're out to do. We are a nonprofit, non-governmental, privately supported association of individuals, firms, and corporations having interest in the Virginia products, forest products. And one of our largest objectives is to create awareness for the importance of lumber and wood coming from Virginia. So after that, I'm going to start out with, in Virginia, there are 25.4 million acres of land. 60%, which equates to 15.3 million acres, are proven to be commercially productive forest lands. And also there is approximately 500,000 acres devoted to parks, wilderness areas, or scenic and historic areas. So I'm going to describe a group of people that I want to represent that will be directly impacted by this bill, because this bill would directly impact the loggers. And this is where the majority of our products come from, and we couldn't operate without the loggers. So over 25% of the industrial establishments within the state of Virginia deal with forest products. And to give you a little bit of an idea of different types of industries we have, there are about 160 sawmills, 170 furniture plants, and 7 large pulp and paper mills in Virginia. So moving into Virginia's hardwood forest, we have one of the largest hardwood forest industries in the nation, and it still grows about twice the amount of what is harvested for lumber per year. So we're still outgrowing the amount that is harvested in Virginia every year. So moving down into some employee information, 1 of 7 manufacturing employees within the Commonwealth belong to a forest products industry. So just a little bit about our industry on how we sort of work. The industry as a whole consumes enough of its own byproducts each year, which would be sawdust, bark, things like that, to save over 2 million barrels of oil. And we shouldn't ban logging in the 9.2% of the Virginia state's forest, because this will directly impact us so much that we will be put out of business completely. And one of my strongest feelings on this is the logging population in Virginia as a whole. The average logger is about 49 years old. And in the future, it may not happen right now, but 10, 20 years down the road, once these loggers grow up, we're going to run out of loggers. And I feel as if we don't need to put more strain on this industry than what we already have, because we're going to run out of loggers eventually. And this area in Virginia, we can use to fuel our industry. Thank you.
I'm Damian Harris, and I oppose the passing of S-3420. Passing S-3420, the National Forest Protection and Restoration Act, would be an extreme and rash decision for us to make this time. First off, all logging operations on national forests are made to generate revenue, ensure biodiversity, and prevent or fix damages from fires and pest and disease outbreaks. Nowadays, in today's fast-growing technologically sound society, silviculture practices that we use promote wildlife and biodiversity. Sedimentation occurs most frequently when bare mineral soil is exposed. Logging can expose bare mineral soil, although sedimentation can be mitigated by implementing proper state BMPs, which we use today, and every state has their own set of proper BMPs. Logging can be used and is used to return our national forests to their pristine state, because earlier in America's history we kind of ravaged the national forests and took advantage of them, and now we're trying to return them to a biologically sound state, and we can use logging and silvicultural practices to do this. For western states, wildfires are a serious concern. Logging can leave slash and debris across the landscape that is fuel for wildfires. With the growing biomass market, slash and any other woody debris can be used as a renewable energy source that will decrease the fuel for fires. By passing this bill, burn sites cannot be harvested to try to get some of the return on the remaining timber or to mitigate the safety hazards for standing dead timber. This also goes for pest and disease outbreaks. Logging can be used as a method to combat some of the pests and diseases, such as southern pine beetle, which is in the southern region of America. The way to eradicate and mitigate their damages is to harvest the timber that's there. Logging can also be used to eradicate invasive species such as the tree of heaven, Ailanthus. By passing this bill, we would be making a mistake in prohibiting ourselves of using a resourceful method in managing our national forest.
Hello, my name is Sean Yates, and I'm an economist for the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I've been asked to give my opinion on the S-3420 National Forest Restoration and Protection Act. In Congress in 1992, a professional forester admitted that over a course of 12 years, the Forest Service had lost approximately $7.3 billion. In 1996, Congress allowed the use of $1 billion to be used by the National Forest Timber Program. These funds were to be used for timber sale planning, administration, logging road construction, and timber productivity research. However, timber sales this year only reached $597 million, and then the Forest Service put $367 million of this right back into the timber program. Bottom line, this means a huge loss of over $1 billion for taxpayers. Only about 30,000 people are employed as a direct result of logging on public lands. And since this operation loses money at such a high rate, it makes no sense to punish our taxpayers by the continued use of such an invaluable operation. If all commercial logging on public forest were to stop, we could redirect the current logging subsidies into ecological restoration jobs and employ each of the public land timber workers that are already making low wages with a salary increase, and have money left over to go and to help to reduce the deficit in the U.S. Treasury. As a final note, less than 5% of our nation's timber supply comes from logging done on national forests, and this means that if the bill was passed, that the timber supply of our nation would not be greatly impacted. To make up for this 5% loss, we could easily employ better utilization of the timber we cut off of other lands and more efficient recycling. With all this being said, I highly support the passing of S-3420 based on a purely economical standpoint. Thank you.
My name is Matt Wolansky. I'm an ecologist working in close affiliation with Virginia Tech. The National Forest Protection and Restoration Act poses a policy that would change the way we manage our natural resources in our federal forest lands through the elimination of timber sales. One area of concern in regards to changes made by the bill are the impacts on wildfire. Will the elimination of logging and thinning of federal forests increase or decrease wildfire? The scientific studies suggest that logging or thinning of commercially viable trees does not reduce wildfire threat, but instead may increase fire threat for a number of reasons. The leaving behind of slash, an important BMP practice used to reduce erosion after logging, provides an available ground cover fuel source. The removal of large mature trees and thinning can increase fire intensity by removing thick-barked, fire-resistant trees. Thinning of these trees reduces the cooling shade of forest canopy, reduces the buffer effect associated with wind speed, and increases the growth of underbrush due to light penetration. If the goal is to reduce wildfire hazard, small brush and small trees up to 8 to 10 inches in diameter should be removed. Any larger tree removal is unnecessary. With respect to wildfire, it is also important to consider that high-intensity fires provide a valuable habitat system termed a snag forest, which supports a wide variety of wildlife. The proposed bill will eliminate species succession, resulting in more old-growth forests over time. These forests provide a unique habitat that is critical for the survival of certain wildlife and plant species. Disturbance from fire, wind, and landslides can be expected to provide natural successional patterns that are important for early to mid-successional species. Other important ecological functions that need to be considered are the effects this bill will have on soil and water health. Forest roads, stream crossings, and skid trails must be constructed during harvest operations and are significant sources of soil erosion and water degradation, and sedimentation into waterways. BMPs have been shown to mitigate the impacts of logging on many operations. However, the elimination of logging altogether is the most effective ecological option for maintaining soil health and water quality. Moving forward with this bill, it is also important to consider the impacts of horse and bike trails, as these can also be very damaging to ecosystem health. Thank you all.
Hello, my name is Cameron Owens. I'm a social consultant and I predominantly work in forest resource policy. I'm here to talk about the possible positive and negative social implications if this bill were enacted. The restoration and protection of the forest land could have many sociocultural positive advantages. There's little what's called pristine forest left in the United States, and much of this is located on federally owned lands. So the enactment of this bill would obviously protect these areas further. This is important to many in the United States who might just place some cultural value in the forest or even just believe the forest has its own inherent value. This would also benefit future generations and their use and enjoyment of the areas. Also, the act of commercial logging was banned would help to increase recreation in the areas. If there are more areas designated for recreation, more people would come to see maybe areas they haven't seen before. The bill specifically mentions that it will have no adverse effect on Native American tribes. And lastly, prescribed burns, which were listed in the bill, could have a very positive effect on people living in the area, making them feel safer, more peace when they sleep, that they don't have to worry about severe wildfire. Obviously, most of the negative social implications fall on the logging industry. Many commercial loggers would lose their jobs or be forced to relocate. For many people, maybe they've been living in this area their entire lives, and it's all they know, it's all they've really done. It'd be difficult to find them other jobs, and maybe that's all they want to do is work in the logging industry. And also, it creates, could create problems with our logging heritage. Lastly, banning logging in areas where it's mostly federally owned could cause problems in states like Oregon, where most of their forest is federally owned, would significantly decrease their logging productivity. Thanks.
Hello everyone. I'm here on behalf of the National Park Service to talk to you about our support of the Senate Bill 3420. One of the National Park Service's highest priorities is community building and helping to foster an environment that promotes outdoor activity and also public interest. We want locals to be active in preserving the health of their natural surroundings. Logging is an industry that it provides a lot of jobs, but it also damages the environment quite a bit. And it also damages our forests and the lands that surround it. When the trees are removed, it allows for excess erosion and degradation of soil quality. And also makes habitat less available for the animals that live in the area. This makes the land pretty much unusable, which is why we need restoration plans. Restoration programs create jobs and also foster community involvement. The best part is that the lands can be used for recreation and tourism, which creates over 30 times the jobs and income that commercial logging would have created. Recreation and tourism support economies and communities. So the National Park Service is in support of Senate Bill 3420 because it supports the restoration of the natural heritage and biodiversity of public lands through restoration programs. Thank you for your time.
Hello everybody, my name is Allie Hay and I am a representative for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm here to talk to you about the proposed bill S3420. The intention of this bill is to stop all logging on U.S. Forest Service land. My agency supports the passing of this bill for many reasons, and I'll go over a couple of them now. For those of you that do not know, the Fish and Wildlife Service is an agency within the Department of the Interior. We manage fish, wildlife, and natural habitats. Our mission is to work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. Passing this bill would mean placing a ban on logging on Forest Service land. A major aspect of banning logging would be a decrease in erosion. If we decrease erosion and runoff, we can decrease stream siltation, turbidity, and nutrient pollution. These have always been a major issue in terms of fish. Many species of fish, including rare and endangered species, live in waters that flow through Forest Service land. Although we can't always control what enters streams from other sources, we have a chance to control these sources. In terms of wildlife, logging and logging roads have fragmented and degraded much of the forest habitat. This skews the natural forest edge to interior forest ratio and decreases livable habitat, which can increase competition. Fragmentation can also cause isolation, which leads to lack of breeding and can ultimately put species on the threatened, endangered, or rare species list. Another issue that has been raised on this topic is that of fire. Fire has always been a large concern in some habitats due to logging. It's a natural part of most forest habitats, and without it, invasive species would be allowed to persist and some plant species couldn't reproduce at all. However, the way that most Forest Service logging operations run changes the way that fire naturally works in the habitat. The severity of a fire increases when fewer trees are available, and this can permanently damage habitats that aren't used to such powerful fires. Ultimately, logged forests are left with too much fuel, and they burn too often, too long, or too hot, or they're not left with enough fuel and the benefits of fire are never seen in that habitat. In this situation, the costs outweigh the benefits. If we pass this bill and stop logging on Forest Service lands, we may be able to spend the funds on research and reclamation or on outreach and education. These are the reasons that the Fish and Wildlife Service supports passing this bill. Thank you for your time.
I'm here to represent the U.S. Forest Service, and we agree with S3420 because of the environmental, public, and agency benefits that it will bring. With the halt of timber harvesting in the National Forest, more recreation opportunities will open up. With this country, many more people are getting out and trying to go out and have recreation opportunities. Without the timber there, we can provide more recreation for these people. Recreation can bring in up to 30 times more revenue than timber and bring in 30 more jobs. The timber industry supplies only about 5% of the national timber that goes into circulation here. And without that, it's not that much of a loss. Without that as well, there may be more research going into woodless products. The forest will become more resilient without all the machinery and roads being built into the forest and the mature trees being taken out, along with all the other facts that we've heard today with light penetration coming in and allowing the smaller fuels to build up. Without this, fires will be less of a problem. Timber harvesting does not induce more fires, and will allow the flora and fauna to become more vital. Personal permits still allow people to use the wood in the forest in specific ways. With the loss of jobs from the halting of harvesting of timber, there will be retraining, job search, and adjustment services for these people. They will not just be forgotten and pushed away. Overall, the benefits outweigh the costs of stopping commercial logging on federal public lands. Thank you.
My name is Morgan Bissell. I'm the senator from Virginia, and I'm a conservationist. I believe first and foremost we need to protect our woodlands and everything that we can gain from them. However, unfortunately, I'm also a realist. That's why with a heavy heart I have to say I can't support this bill. In the state of Virginia alone, we have 15.7 million acres of forest lands. The logging industry brings in $27.5 billion towards Virginia and offers 144,000 jobs. At the current rate of harvest, more trees are being grown currently in the state of Virginia than are being logged. It is a sustainable resource that is very vital to our nation, to our state, and I don't believe we are quite yet ready to get rid of it. At such a time that we are able to diminish our requirement on this resource and seek other practices that can, I would love to see this bill up again or a bill similar to this in the Senate. Currently, I just don't believe that we are ready to jump from this ship. I believe the water is just a little bit too turbulent to safely make it. That's all.
I'm Tyler Mackay. I'm the representative of the state of Oregon. The S3420 bill will attempt to restore and protect the national forests that exist in our country. These national forests have long been a source of timber, recreation, beauty, and many other benefits. In my state of Oregon, the forests are particularly useful and needed to provide jobs and economy for many of the rural areas in the eastern portion of the state. However, these economic needs are not just in my state. They're across the entire U.S. In many of the western states, the national forests absolutely dominate the landscape, and much of the logging that goes on is dominated by the U.S. Forest Service. So the commercial logging on the forest lands is needed to provide these jobs in rural areas. In recent years, there has been added restrictions onto the logging in these national areas, and it has cut down on the number of operations going on in the eastern portion of my state, and has led to some decline in the number of jobs. However, I still believe wholeheartedly that in order to keep a good economy in these rural areas, we need to keep the national forest open to harvest. If we choose not to, then we'll lose so many of the jobs that we already have provided. Of course, one of the opportunities is to provide training in other fields if we decide to cancel out the logging on public lands. Then we can't guarantee that they will find a job with this new training, whereas they already have one with what they know now. Two things were brought up is that they could do ecological restoration or they could work in recreation. The problem with ecological restoration is, unlike logging, it doesn't bring in an income. It can't help to support itself, so it rides entirely off of taxpayer money. And along with recreation, we do offer it on many U.S. Forest Service sites, and areas where we don't offer it are often because there is not going to be any kind of need or want for recreation in that area. A lot of U.S. Forest Service lands are not pretty areas. They're given to the government for a reason. Of course, in my state, we're also very much into supporting the environment. We love our forests, we revere our forests even, and this is always reflected on my voting with concern for the environment. But in this case, I believe that we can fulfill our needs in different ways. There are many tools in the trade of logging that are used to restore the forest, to help regenerate new forest, and to just focus on removing trees that are only problematic. I believe that we can use these to not sacrifice the financial stability of many of these rural areas and still support our environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay. I'm either Senator John McCain or Senator Jeff Flake out of the state of Arizona. I'm here discussing National Forest Protection and Restoration Act. I will be voting yes on this because I believe that America's economic and environmental interests are mutually exclusive and therefore linked. This bill exhibits this because it will save the taxpayers money in the economic aspect, and it will also be extremely beneficial to the environment. Coming from the state of Arizona, one of my main concerns is forest fires. Last year alone, Arizona had nearly 2,000 non-prescribed burns that burned over 100,000 acres. And as a nation, we spent almost $2 billion on suppressing forest fires in 2013 alone. Stopping commercial logging will result in significant decrease in forest fires by keeping the canopy and eliminating the small brush that burns better than the large trees, as they exclaimed earlier. Not only will this bill decrease the number of forest fires, it will also increase native biodiversity in these natural forests and facilitate economic recovery within the communities affected by logging. One thing that I found interesting, that after the 2-year phase-out period, the funds from the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management will be going to alternatives to wood in industries such as construction and paper, and forest fire education, and also infrastructure to reduce damage from forest fires. I just wanted to touch on that in 2014, Arizona started the Forest Restoration Initiative, and they voted that they're going to allocate $10 million of taxpayer money to thin upwards of 20,000 acres in the Coco Nino forest to improve quality. So it wouldn't make sense that we're going to spend $10 million of taxpayer money and then spend even more money to cut down more trees that we just improve the quality of the forest. Most people know Arizona for a desert, but that's not the case. In fact, it has 27% of the state is covered by forests, including the largest stand of ponderosa pine in the world. So with the fact that Arizona is a desert, and our recent population growth over the last couple of years, which doesn't look like it will be subsiding anytime soon, it's no secret that Arizona is very stressed on water quality or water supply. And forests can help maintain a water table and distribute water to communities throughout the state. So I believe that voting yes on this bill will be mutually beneficial on saving our taxpayers money as well as maintaining our forests and their biodiversity in the state of Arizona. Thank you for your
Good
time.
afternoon, everyone. My name is Malia Liddy, and I am the current senator for the state of California. After much deliberation over this bill, California chooses to support S3420, National Forest Protection and Reforestation Act. Currently, California is comprised of 33 million acres of forest. 19 million acres of this is managed by the federal government. While California and neighboring states of the Pacific Northwest have had a long history with logging forest lands, we feel that it is unnecessary to allow logging on federal land when most of our logging industry is conducted through independently owned forest lands. As many of you may be aware, California has been one of the hardest hit states in regards to wildfire damages. In 2012 alone, 7,948 fires consumed over 800,000 acres. Also, in August 2013, the Rim Fire was categorized as the third worst fire in California history, burning over 250,000 acres. By supporting this bill, we are allowing for forest fire risk and hazardous fuel accumulation to be reduced on federal lands. Because we are known for being the #1 travel destination across the United States and tourism is highly profitable, many of these federal areas can be focused into becoming travel destinations. With the passing of this bill, grants for new job training and relocation will be provided to support those citizens currently working to log federal lands. Currently, tourism generates $95.1 billion annually into the economy, as well as it supplies 873,000 jobs within the state of California. Because only a fraction of logging is currently being done on our federal land, it is producing a weak economic output and leaving behind hazardous fuel for wildfires. By stopping the logging and switching to a tourism-based approach, more jobs and profit will be generated with a higher level of safety throughout the state. Thank you.
The state of Maine encompasses 19.7 million acres of land, with only 170,000 acres of it owned by the federal government. That is a mere 0.8% of the land that S3420, the National Forest Protection and Restoration Act, is addressing in the state of Maine. Although the legislation addresses its intention to eliminate commercial logging programs that are considered fiscally wasteful and ecologically destructive on federal public lands, there are many points of contradiction throughout S3420 that need to be explored. With my personal educational background in the conservation of natural resources, I find this bill to be poorly written and highly contradictory in many aspects. For starters, there is no clear definition for what is to be considered fiscally wasteful and ecologically destructive, though it seems this bill addresses a full ban of commercial logging on all federally owned land, regardless of fiscal and ecological responsibility. The bill states it will protect communities from wildfires. However, it cannot be overlooked that the strategic removal of timber from forested areas has been a proven method of wildfire prevention for decades due to the removal of dead and down timber. As we have previously heard from representatives from opposition groups, logging as a form of management has been shown to be a preventative measure for unmanageable wildfire outbreaks. Although the bill discusses a study in the Sierra Nevada forests that found an increased risk of fire severity due to the removal of cooling shade and leaving flammable debris, the forests of Maine and many other locations across the United States are far from similar to the areas that were studied. The western part of the United States sees significantly less precipitation than other parts of the country, but commercial logging is being pointed to as the point source of wildfires nationally with this bill. The bill also discusses the 1995 Forest Service draft report entitled Forest Service Program for Forest and Rangeland Resources, a Long-Term Strategic Plan, which shows that recreation and tourism in the National Forest System creates over 30 times more jobs and generated over 30 times more income than commercial logging on national forests. I feel as though it is a fair argument to discuss recreational impacts on native biodiversity and natural heritage, two things that the bill focuses to reestablish and restore that have been damaged due specifically to commercial logging. Overall, this bill is poorly written, and my constituents in Maine have consistently opposed legislation that would increase federal authority in their state. I therefore cannot support a bill that grammatically tricks its readers into believing that a full ban of logging on all federal lands based on biased studies and scientific evidence should be accepted across all states. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. S3420 has good intentions, but seems rather unnecessary. It would hurt our local, state, and national economies while doing relatively little to protect our environmental concerns. This bill will hurt the logging and timber industries of my state as well as that of the nation. Small logging operations and sawmills nationwide could go out of business while timber product prices will increase across the board. This will also cut funds and thus jobs that are responsible for the management and upkeep of these forests. The argument has been made in support of this bill that recreation and tourism account for more jobs and revenue than those from timber sales. However, this does not completely negate the profit from harvesting on federal lands. These funds are allocated back into the programs that tend to our nation's forest, and without this money, the necessary management methods that preserve forest health may suffer. West Virginia has 1.1 million acres of federal lands that are maintained by federal employees, which have been trained in managing natural resources. These stewards of the environment follow the objectives of federal agencies and programs, which focus on helping people share and enjoy forests while conserving the environment for the future generations. Conservation of forests should not exempt the removal of trees altogether. Sometimes harvesting is the best way to preserve health and composition of an ecosystem. Timber sales are often the result of an ecologically sound decision that requires the removal of portions of the forest. By passing S3420, necessary prescriptions, for example a salvage cut, to protect an area from disease and infestation would be prohibited. By banning cutting, the forest remains susceptible, which would threaten the survival of certain native vegetative species of an entire ecosystem. This bill in its current form does not allow natural resource professionals the flexibility to make calculated decisions to do what is best for forest health. Compared to the series of environmental issues that plague West Virginia, such as surface coal mining and chemical spills, Logging on federal lands is the least of our problems. Needless to say, old-growth sites and areas of cultural, environmental, and historical value are to not be harvested, but that is already understood and accepted without the passing of this bill. In areas where it is feasible to harvest, best management practices are followed to protect site and water quality. With these regulations being implemented, I do not see any major threat to environmental health that can be prevented by S3420. Forest preservation is a concern of the nation, but how it is obtained should be left in the hands of our natural resource professionals. I oppose S3420 because it prohibits sound silvicultural methods prescribed to preserve forest health and will hinder our local, state, and national economies.
Hi, I'm Austin Brock. I'm representing the great state of Arizona today. I'm here to deliberate on Senate Bill 3420, the National Forest Protection and Restoration Act. Arizona is mainly known for its dry climate and desert, but we are home to 6 national forests totaling over 10,250,000 acres. It's home to 28 wilderness areas. If this bill passes, it could have huge impacts on our local lumber markets and production that could cause severe economic problems to some of our smaller communities. Ethical harvesting of the forest creates a variety of habitat that promotes biodiversity in animals, trees, and ecosystems. Such harvesting techniques, such as placing buffer zones, can relieve stress on waterways and locations that have high erosion risk. It is a clear fact that some of the forest does need to be protected from harvesting in order to achieve old growth status, but by placing a ban on all of it, it would hinder the biodiversity. Supporters of this bill want to claim that by stop harvesting, it would prevent wildfires and create a setting of nature that was once found when the colonists came over, but that, what they're exactly trying to create, was made by the Native Americans through prescribed burning. Harvesting and prescribed burning is needed to reduce fuel loads and help prevent wildfires, which is a major concern in our state of Arizona. So in light of all this, I cannot vote yes on Senate Bill 3420.
I will now give you my opinion of this bill, and I am representing the state of Florida. So I want to take a moment and thank everyone for sharing their opinions on behalf of their institutions and my fellow senators. This proposed bill is trying to eliminate the effects of harvesting on the ecosystem and save taxpayers' money. I do not believe that it is doing either of these in my state of Florida. Florida houses 3 national forests, which contain about 2.8 million acres. These acres are given to the United States Forest Service to manage for multiple use. The Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act states that national forests were established to be managed for outdoor recreation, range, watershed, wildlife and fish, as well as timber. Timber production is a need that sometimes this country takes too lightly. Almost everything you use has some kind of wood product in it, from the houses you live in to the cell phones you use on a daily basis. The U.S. Forest Service harvests about 4% of the standing timber in Florida per year, which may seem negligible, but it's actually over 100,000 acres. The money from these timber sales goes into the National Treasury, which is cycled back into the economy for all the sectors that the National Treasury funds. Also, the wood products are cycled back into the economy that you use. So, on an economic standpoint, I do not believe this is a good bill to pass for my state of Florida. The other main aspect this bill attempts to mitigate is the damage to the ecosystems. However, many of the harvests of the national forests in Florida are done to mimic natural disasters or a harvest for a specific regeneration regime. For example, the sand pine scrub oak forests in Florida depend on completely stand-replacing fires of very high intensity heat. Now that the wildland-urban interface has grown so much, we can't risk having this level of fire completely regenerate the stand. They have prescribed clear cuts to mimic this disturbance, which don't cause harm to the urban areas nearby. In this case, selling timber for profit is just a byproduct of the timber sale. This is just one of many examples where silvicultural harvest treatments are done to increase habitat and population of wildlife species. Timber harvest can also slow disease, encourage new generation, or increase biodiversity. Therefore, I must vote no to pass this bill for the state of Florida. Thank you. That concludes this session of the Senate. S 3420 will not be passed. We will now hear from the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, having considered it with the solemn regard to the principles of the Constitution that it is my duty to uphold, I reach the same conclusion that this bill, the National Forest Protection and Restoration Act, ought not to become law, and I herewith return it to both the House and the Senate. Though we strive to protect, restore, and expand American forest, we cannot deny the profound impact forestry has had on our country and countrymen. For many decades, timber harvesting on public lands in the United States was an important source of socioeconomic benefits to society, especially towards those under the employment of the industry, typically living in rural communities with limited economic opportunities. From the scares of a predicted timber famine in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, we have turned towards conservation to ensure the livelihood and prosperity of this most beautiful country. Conservation, in its popular form, implicates setting aside forever sectors of land away from human degradation and exploitation. However, conservation also entails use for future generation, whether it be for purposes of recreation, preservation, or sustainable harvest. The United States has thrived on our vast amounts of natural resources and over the years has turned to science to make these lands more sustainable and profitable. I'm afraid that the bill, in its current form, is focused more towards heartfelt philanthropic components rather than on the basis of factual solid ecology. Harvests on federal lands have historically been sufficient to maintain forest health and resiliency, control epidemic levels of insect damage, and reduce dead and dying woody debris as fuel for the debilitating forest fires. However, with a 78% decrease in logging practices on our national forests between 1987 and 2011, these practices are no longer being used to best manage and protect the land in an economically and socially viably way. I do acknowledge that recreation creates 30 times more jobs and more revenue than the timber harvesting industry does. But what is not mentioned is the money needed to set up the infrastructure to establish these recreation opportunities. That infrastructure will require annual funding, which again will put economic dependence back on the federal government. Essentially, we'll be taking money and human resources from one sector and putting them straight back into another. The bill also does not show evidence that recreation would even be a viable industry in these currently harvested areas. Because of this uncertainty on such a controversial topic, I just cannot supply my signature to this bill in its current state. I veto the bill and send it back to the Senate with hopes that they take into consideration specific measures that can be carried out to meet the goals and expectations of the Act in a way that would clearly show no economic harm would come from this loss of timber production. My most considerable complaint of the National Forest Restoration and Preservation Act is that it treats all federally owned forests across 50 states as homologous. Let us not place a complete and utter moratorium on timber harvest in this country, but rather reevaluate and inventory which areas within this 5% of harvested land would truly benefit from further protection and transformation towards other forms of purpose and use. The character of our country is determined by what we do with our resources and how we choose to move on in the future. And for the future of American forestry, with modern technology and enthusiasm for conservation and sustainability, the future looks pretty bright.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with News Channel 7 through this two-day process of the bill, HR/Senate S3240. We heard from some awesome groups today: Trout Unlimited, Earth Policy Institute, and Virginia Forest Products Association, along with different agencies, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service. I wonder if they led to the decision that the senators were making during their choices today. I was very interested when they had a 2-2 vote and was wondering if it was going to go differently than the House, but I guess not. I guess that the bill was meant to go the way it did with the speech from the president afterward, with him posing the bill also. It seems that there could be some revisions that need to be made, and hopefully we'll get back to the Senate, and then we'll come back in for a different deliberation. I'm now going to pass it along to Wyatt in the field, where he'll be contacting different organizations or people to see their opinion and how they
You
went.
mentioned that this would affect your business and it would affect watersheds. So how do you feel with this bill being rejected? Are you nervous for the future of fishing in your area?
I'm not necessarily nervous because we're already restoring streams on private land a lot, like in agricultural. We're putting up fences so cows can't go through and breaking down small old mill dams. So I still think that we are working towards restoration and we can get better economics out of these things. But I think this would have just sped up the restoration.
You heard about fires and you wanted extra tourism with this bill passing. So what's the next step for California in terms of tourism with this bill not passing?
Well, we still have a really strong tourism industry, so it won't affect it that much. It would have just grown our economy another step. But hopefully, we'll have some new regulations that are put in place on the bill, and maybe it'll get passed in the future.
Do you think everything went well and are you happy with the results of the whole day?
Yes, I'm extremely happy for the country as well as my state of Florida. I think that harvesting has many beneficial aspects of it that may not be known to the rest of society, but I am very happy that this passed and I'm looking forward to the future of our national forest.
Thank you. Mr. President, so the bill has been declined. You made a great speech today. So were you swayed at all by any arguments either way from people from the National Park Service? It seems like they were opposed to it, but yet you still decided to deny the bill. So do you think there will be any conflict between them moving forward, or are you happy with the overall results?
Well, obviously, I'm happy with the overall results as I didn't think that this bill would pass as it is in its current state. And I did try to take into consideration everybody's different sides. There was just so much he said, she said with whether or not it would be economically feasible on either side. So in its current state, we just need more further research to show whether or not this bill would actually do some good rather than harm some industries. And ban is just a very strong word. So, in any instance where there is some controversy with a strong word, the word should be changed and modified.
Thank you. You did a great job running our country.
Thank you very much for joining us for these long and exhausting past 2 days on Capitol Hill. Tune in tomorrow for your top news stories. Signing off for Wyatt and I. Have a great afternoon.